The Rambam until Halacha Gimel was speaking about the various levels of transgression. Some need korbanos. He spoke about the goat that sent down the mountainside. Does it atone with tshuva, without tshuva? The degree of transgression. However, the Rambam now addresses the present, that we have no Beis Hamikdash. B'zman hazeh she'en Beis Hamikdash kayom. Today, that we no longer have a Beis Hamikdash that exists. Ve'en lonu mizbach kapora. We no longer have an altar to atone for us. Ein sham ela tshuva. The only that exists there is tshuva. So yesterday I mentioned the Rambam could have written Ein lanu ela tshuva, or Ein ela tshuva. What's Ein sham ela tshuva? There is only there, only tshuva. What's there? Ein sham ela tshuva. Hatshuva chaberes al kol averos. Tshuva in its own right atones all averos. Afilu rosha kol yomov was a tshuva b'achrona. If a person's a rosh his whole life and he does tshuva at the very end, ein maskira lo shum dovim risho. They will not mention him when he comes in judgment. They will not mention any of his evil that he had perpetrated during his life. Shenema rishas harosha liyikoshelbo biyom shuvam risho. The evil of the Rosha, he will not be entrapped with it on the day that he repented when he returned from his evil ways. The Rambam, it's interesting, writes, he did tshuva at the end. He doesn't say B'sof Yomov, at the end of his days, B'achrona, at the end. So we'll say that's what it means. We'll see from Rambam later that maybe yes, maybe not, because the Rambam uses a different terminology when he refers to the end of a person's life. He says B'sof Yomov, at the end of his days. And over here he says B'achrona, at the end. Before we go further, I want to first address he says, although we no longer have an altar of atonement, Ein shom ela tshuva. Only there do we have tshuva. He doesn't say Ein lonu ela tshuva. What's the there? So I was thinking that the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos that every mitzvah we do, we create an angel. And these angels are called praklitim. They're called advocates. So at the end of one's life, we have positive angels, we have advocates, and we have prosecuting angels. Every mitzvah created an angel that's an advocate. And on the other hand, we have, every time we transgress, we sin, we create a negative angel. And when it comes to evaluate and to pass judgment on a human being's life, all these angels, the advocates and the prosecuting angels come, and each one speaks exactly for what he represents. So at one time, you did tshuva, the only way you were able to somehow impact on the negative, on the prosecutor, was only because you had in your stead, you had the korban. You had the ser mishtaleach. You had the goat that you send down the mountainside. We had things then that we don't have today. Today, ein sham ela tshuva. The only thing we have there to address the location in which one is judged, meaning that court scene, that spiritual court scene, the only thing we have standing for us is tshuva. Did he do tshuva? Did he not do tshuva? What was the quality of that tshuva? I think that is the sham. Because what has to be addressed is what actually causes the negative to be dissipated or to be vaporized. That's what Ram uses the term, ain't sham el the tshuva. Maybe. Then he concludes, "Va'atzmo shomi kippurim mechaper l'shovim," and the essence of the day of Teshuva atones for those who do Teshuva. Shnema ki b'yom hazeh chaper aleichem. On that day, you will be atoned. On that day. Now, there's a machlokas in the Gemara in Shavuos. Rameir says something phenomenal. He says that a person, even if he doesn't do tshuva, the day itself atones. Like the Rambam had said by the Sor Mishtaleach, by the goat that's thrown down the mountainside, even if one doesn't do tshuva on the kalos. Kalos means mitzvahs aseh, mitzvahs lo aseh, that don't carry the death penalty or spiritual excision. Even if one does not do tshuva, when you throw that goat down the mountainside, you're atoned. One only needs tshuva for the chamuros, for those that carry the more severe liabilities, like Kores and Mises Bezdin, or he says shuas sheker, shuas shov. Person takes an oath, a false oath, or an oath in vain. So we see that without the person's participation in tshuva, something's able to bring about that level of atonement, is able to address that impurity that he created through the sin, although he had no remorse and he didn't make a commitment. However, a mayor is of the opinion that even if one doesn't do tshuva, Yom Kippur is mechaper. The essence, the holiness of the day itself atones for the person, it purifies the person. As long as you don't object to the day, you don't flaunt the day, meaning you'll go and you'll eat on the day. You will not observe the day. If you desecrate the day, then the day does nothing for you. It's only if you maintain the status of the day, its level of sanctity. Rameir holds, even if one doesn't do tshuva, the remorse and the commitment or the verbal expression, the Rama said before, you have kapara, you have atonement. We don't rule like Rameir, rule like the Chachomim, that Yom Kippur is only mechaper, only atones for the person, only if you do tshuva. So when the pasuk says, "B'yom hazeh chaper aleichem," on that day you will atone, only in conjunction with tshuva. If a person is in a state of tshuva, so although the tshuva in its own right is not sufficient to fully reinstate the person, but together with the holiness of the day, being exposed to that will purify the person, that will strip the person of those traces of the impurity, of the sin that the person had transgressed. That's the understanding. But it's only in conjunction with tshuva, that's when Yom Kippur is able to be effective. I'll give you an example. Alan just got on. The doctor who goes into the operating room, although he showers before, because of the level of sterileness of that room, he has to use certain types of soaps. But those soaps could be not sufficiently sterilizing unless he previously had actually taken a shower. Yom Kippur in its own right, the purity of the day itself is not enough, because the sin is like a chatzitza. That's we spoke about. If you have some kind of adhesion on your body, you go into a mikveh, doesn't help you, because the water is not coming in contact with every part of your body because of the adhesion. But what about a person that has a trace of uncleanliness and it doesn't interfere with the water touching one's flesh? It's a valid immersion. Tshuva basically cleanses the person. The traces of that impurity. Yom Kippur, because of its degree of holiness, is able to actually vaporize those traces of unholiness. That's the Kedushas Hayom. And that's Ki B'yom Hazeh Chaper Aleichem. If you did tshuva, which mainly removed all those adhesions, the spiritual interference, impediments, now tshuva, Yom Kippur is able to bring the person to that level of purity. We'll see later, in Rambam quotes a posuk that the mitzvah of Yom Kippur, there's a mitzvah saseh, we said it before, the Rambam rules that throughout the year there's no chiyuv, there's no obligation to do tshuva. The Rambam says kishiyasa tshuva. If a person chooses to do tshuva, this is the way you do it, and you have to have an oral confession. The Rambam later, when he speaks with Yom Kippur, he says, on Yom Kippur, chayiv odem lasas tshuva. On Yom Kippur, you're obligated to do tshuva. Why? Because the pasuk says, Lifnei Hashem titoru. Before God, you should purify yourself. So therefore, you need to purify yourself in Yom Kippur. You have to achieve more than just removal of sin. Purity is there's no trace of what originally existed. So you have Teshuva, and then you have Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur will bring Taro, but that's only after the Teshuva had done the heavy lifting, so-called, did the majority of the removal of the impediment, then Yom Kippur, but that's Taro. Taro means there's not even a trace of what a remnant of that original sin. Now the Rambam makes the differentiations. He says today the Mizmach Kapora is Teshuva. The altar of atonement is Teshuva. But even though Teshuva rehabilitates the person and brings him almost to a full return, he needs other things in conjunction with the Teshuva. As he just said, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur brings you to fully to be reinstated, but not always. It depends on the degree of transgression. Aval bisha tshuva mechaper sal hakol. Tshuva is mechaper in everything. It atones for everything. We'll see the atonement is not full reinstatement. And the essence of the day also participates in that atonement process. Atonement is rehabilitation. The Gemara says, why is atonement called kapora? Tomorrow in Tzvochim, because the Kohen, let's say Chatos, the Kohen had to dip his finger in the blood, his pointing finger of his right hand, and sprinkle the blood on the Mizbeach. That blood on his finger has Kedusha. So there's, even after he sprinkles the blood, what does he do with the remnant of the blood? Does he rinse it off under water? So Gemara says the cup from what he had taken, the vessel that he had taken the blood to sprinkle, he takes his finger and he runs it over the edge of that cup to remove the blood from his finger. That's how he removes the remnant of blood from his finger. And they're called, these vessels are called Kipurei Zohov. Kipurei Zohov, these gold vessels, which he runs his finger over to remove the blood from his finger, it's called Kipurei Zohov. So what does Kipurei mean? It's the vessel, it's the edge of the vessel which cleanses his finger. It removes any remnant of the blood that originally had that he sprinkled, that vessel removes it. So the Gemara says identically, kapara means that when you do tshuva and you follow the various protocols, it accomplishes the same thing. It removes every trace of the sin from the person. That is the meaning of the word kapara. Lechaper means to remove, like you scrape the blood off. When you rub it over the edge, you run it over the edge of the vessel. When you do tshuva, the result is kapara. You're removing from the person all the traces of that sin. That's kapara. So we're saying tshuva is mechaper. Tshuva is mechaper salakol. However, you need other things in conjunction also to assist, as he says, al pi tshuva mechaper salakol. Ba'atzmo yom kippur mechaper. And the essence of the day is mechaper. But we'll see not in its own right. It has to be in conjunction with tshuva. Yeshaver shemiskaper l'shaiton. There's certain averus transgressions that tshuva in its own right fully reinstates the person. Full reinstatement. Yeshaver shemiskaper elo lachazman. There are other sins, transgressions. It's only after a certain period the person has the atonement. Meaning it holds it in abeyance, and then when you come to a certain point, then you're fully atoned. Ketzad, for instance, over Adam al Aveiro, Adam over Adam al Mitzvah Sasei, Shem Bokores. A person did not say the Krishma, did not eat matzah the Seder, did not wear tzitzis on a four-cornered garment, did not sit in the sukkah. He violated Mitzvah Sasei, Vosa Tshuva, and he did Tshuva. It's the words of the Gemara. He does not leave that location until he's fully forgiven. Tshuva in its own right brings about a full reinstatement. He's fully rehabilitated. That's a mitzvah saseh. Ube'elu nemar, quotes a pasuk, regarding mitzvah saseh, shuvu bonim shuvovin, return errant children, erpa Erpa Meshuvosechem. I will heal your return. When you return, you will be fully healed. So what is that referring to? That's mitzvah saseh. Overall mitzvah lo saseh she'ebo koris. If one violates a negative commandment which does not carry the koris penalty, liability, lo mises bezdin, and also doesn't carry the liability of mises bezdin, death penalty, v'osa tshuva. Tshuva toler v'yom hakipurim mechaper. The tshuva holds that sin, the liability in abeyance, the tshuva, Yom Kippur mechaper. Yom Kippur is the kapora. So it seems to be here, until Yom Kippur comes, the tshuva is only holding off the consequence of that sin. It will not affect you negatively. Tolech. It holds it in abeyance. Yom Kippurim mechaper. Now when Yom Kippur comes, if it's predicated on tshuva, Yom Kippur is the atonement. It seems from here, okay, what qualifies you for kapara? Because you did tshuva. But on the negative commandment, the tshuva itself is not the mechaper. It allows you to be eligible for the Yom Kippur to reinstate you. Ube'elu nemar, ki biyom hazeh yechaper aleichem. On that day, you will be atoned. So it seems to be the atonement takes place on that day. But of course, that has to be predicated on tshuva. So tshuva for the negative commandment is not kapora. It's not a way, it's chipped away. There's no reinstatement for the negative commandment. No reinstatement. But if you did the tshuva, the reinstatement comes on Yom Kippur. That's when you reinstated. Okay? For mitzvah aseh, the reinstatement is immediate. What about overall krisus and mises bezdin vos tshuva? If he violated a negative command which carries the liability of kores or death penalty, and he does tshuva, tshuva Yom Kippurin tolin. Tshuva Yom Kippur holds it in abeyance. The Yisurin habo and olav gom misakapora. Now the Rambam uses different terminology here. See, he says, regarding the negative command which carries the liability of kores and mises bezdin, he uses the same term, tolin. So he should say, the Yisurin mechaprin, and the Yisurin atone. We said before, tshuva only qualifies you to be eligible for kapora by a negative commandment. What's the mechaper? Yom Kippur. So the tshuva were about no reinstatement. Yom Kippur is the mechaper. Now he says, well, if the negative commandment, which carries the liability of kores, the Rambam says, tshuva Yom Kippurim tolin, but here we see tolin doesn't mean the same thing. It completes the kapor. It seems to be that partial kapor you had before this moment. He doesn't say you have to meet those prerequisites. And the Yisurin are the kapora, the suffering, but rather, he says, Gomrim is a kapora. It completes the kapora. So could be. Yom Kippur is Biyom Hazeh Yichaper Aleichem. On that day you will be atoned. Yom Kippur is kapora. Except it's not sufficient kapora for a negative command which carries the death penalty or the liability of kores, unless you also have Yisurin. So therefore he uses the term Gomrin. It completes the kapora. You have the full reinstatement only after you have the Yisurim, you have the suffering. That's what it seems from the Rambam. And then he reiterates this. Ulo me miskapalo kapora gemura achivo ali Yisurim. And he says, under no circumstance will you be atoned unless you have Yisurim. I mean, what does the Rambam have to reiterate? He's already said, the Yisurin government of kapora. And under no circumstance, Amos kappa kapora gemura, achivok Yisurin, unless you have Yisurin. What does he have to add that? I mean, he just said that. You need Yisurin to be gomer to kapora. You can't have kapora gemura. What is this reiteration? Because I think, I always say, everybody has their Yisurim. I'll give you an example. A person sends his son to day school. And the teacher calls the father up and says, your son is not doing well in Gemara. He's not really that interested. And however, in his secular subjects, he's doing outstanding. So the father says, thank God, he goes to school. I'm very happy. To me, it's not a problem. He's not touched. He doesn't have any aggravation because of this. But if you have a person who's committed that he wants his child to achieve a certain level of advancement, of education in his Torah subjects, and the Rebbe says your son has no interest, was not learning well, what does it do to the father? Father's pained. The father's aggravated. So for what's aggravation for one person is not aggravation for another person. So for what's Yisurim for one person is not Yisurim for another person. Right? That's Yisurim. So a component of tshuva is charota. Charota. And the Mesilas Yesharim writes, if a person transgressed, how exactly does tshuva correct the wrong you did? Person ate not kosher. You do tshuva, remorse, commit yourself. It's as if you never did the sin, but you didn't do the sin. What exactly is the concept of tshuva? Even though it's a chesed, although you can't undo the action, but somehow you're able to detach yourself from the action that it doesn't carry a liability. How do you do it? So he explains to Mesilas Yesharim that when a person does a sin, you have a degree of pleasure at some level. So when you have the remorse and you regret it, there's a degree of pain. You're regretting it, whether it causes embarrassment, you're disappointed with yourself, it creates a degree of pain, emotional pain, whatever the way that pain manifests itself. That pain that you have counters the pleasure that you had from the sin. That undoes that. So it's within the realm of you're paying the price to a degree. That's how you undo and you detach yourself from that original action. You wish you never had relevance or any association with that action. This is the Mesilas Yesharim. So if that's the case, let's say, as the Rabbeinu Yonah says, the very levels of qualitative levels of tshuva. There's busha. You're pained. You're embarrassed. So the question is, what do you need Yisurim? The tshuva itself, the process, is pain itself. It seems from the Rambam, besides the tshuva itself, which causes you that embarrassment or that level of disappointment with yourself, that is the tshuva itself. In addition to that, you need Yisurim. The Yisurim is external levels of pain, whether it's financial, physical, or emotional, but it's something which is outside the tshuva process. And that's why he says, it has to come upon him. It's not something which is generated within himself. It's something external which comes upon him. Only then do you have the full reinstatement. That's when you have kapara gemura. That's what I was thinking. Of course, otherwise, let the charata be. Let that be the Yisurim. Especially according to Mesilas Yesharim, that's part of the atonement process. That undoes the wrong that you had done and disassociates you from that original action.
Rabbi,
I quote Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah speaks about the various levels of tshuva. He says you have a garment that's soiled, and the uncleanliness is embedded in the fiber, in the core of the fiber. Let's say you soak that garment in water. Although the water may have some level of detergent in it, naturally, just soaking, some of that uncleanliness will come out just through the soaking process. But to bring that garment to a pristine level, you have to take that garment and you have to scrub it to be able to extract the uncleanliness from the core of that fiber. He says that's the various levels of tshuva. Person does tshuva, you have some level of atonement. But because you didn't get to the core of it, So the more you have remorse, the more embarrassed you are, the more you reflect on it, every time you're extracting it to a greater degree. That's Rabbeinu Yonah. So that's what we said then. Basically, to reinstate you, charoto kabbalah, embarrassment. But the more you reflect and the more you feel that remorse and you strengthen that commitment to the future, it's meshubach. Because you're actually advancing, you're becoming reinstated at another level. Because since there are traces, at every level, there's a trace of impurity. At the most intense level, it's no longer there. But at a lesser level, it is there. So every time you go and you confess and you reflect and you have that sense of busha, hareza meshubach, because now you bring the tshuva to another level. But that's not yisurim. That's not yisurim. Yisurim still is external. Okay, I'm going to have to do the chumash.